On today's show, the Atlanta Hawks have all kinds of opportunities to steal a road win in Minnesota. In fact, they were leading by 11 points with 8 minutes to go, but from there, it was all Minnesota. We'll get into all of what transpired and another narrow loss for the Hawks coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1437 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Wednesday evening into Thursday. And today's show, we'll be diving into what became a narrow loss for the Hawks, unfortunately for Atlanta, on the road in Minnesota. A very, very narrow loss, in fact. The Hawks were leading in this game with about 8 minutes to go, up by 11 points. They ended up losing this one 125-124, and it was that close. To be honest with you, if you miss this game, there's plenty to get to on this night, but the Hawks do fall below 500 again at 36-37 for the season. It was a back-to-back with travel, and they're now 2-9 on the second game of a back-to-back this year, and there were chances along the way. In fact, I'll start here. It was a missed opportunity for the Hawks in this game, unquestionably. Atlanta could have stolen this game. That was certainly on the table along the way. I mentioned before already, but they were up, again, at 11 points with 8 minutes to go. Also had a potential dagger shot in the air from Bogey in the final seconds to go up by 4 and would have basically ended the game. Then there was a controversial call we'll get back into later on that contributed to the loss on the game-winning points by the Wolves when Karl-Anthony Towns was quote-unquote fouled by John Collins at the very end of the game. Also down the stretch, Trae Young had 3 turnovers in the fourth quarter. He really struggled. The Hawks were also 9 of 23 from the field and 1 of 7 from 3 in the fourth. And some of that can be attributed potentially to the tired legs playing against an opponent that was not on a back-to-back, and the Hawks were with travel. That does matter, even if people don't always like to talk about it. But at some point, you have to start winning some of these games, and the Hawks just haven't been able to do that for the most part this year. So it was a game the Hawks could have won. I would argue should have won at the end, and we'll get into kind of all what happened in this game, and we'll start with the offense. In general, the offense was good enough in this game. Now, the fourth quarter was not very good, but it's hard to complain about the process, about the offense on a night when the Hawks scored more than 1.2 points per possession against a team that came in with a top 10 defensive rating in the NBA. The Hawks had good numbers in this one shooting-wise, 53% from the floor, 26 from 3. They shot 88% at the free throw line, all really good numbers. The Hawks didn't take enough threes for me. Only 26 attempts is not enough for me, generally speaking. And the Hawks also shot 4 of 17 from floater range and still managed to be pretty efficient on offense. That's pretty hard to do, actually, because they were so good everywhere else. But the biggest problem on offense, which definitely happened in the second half and the fourth quarter as well, was the 17 turnovers the Hawks had in this game, which led directly to 24 points. That is your ball game. If there is one particular, not one play, but one area of this game that the Hawks probably lost the game in, it was this one. Atlanta is always really good at avoiding turnovers. They're in the top 5 of the league in turnover rate, turnovers per game, et cetera. That's been kind of predicated on this roster in recent years. But Minnesota came in as a top 5 team in the league in turnover creation on defense, and that definitely, they won that battle. That was decisive. And not only were they turnovers, they were live ball turnovers. The Wolves had 7 steals, and they took full advantage of all of those things in secondary transition, all that fun stuff. Again, still, the offense was fine. It was good enough for sure against a pretty good defensive team in Minnesota, just not at the best time in the fourth quarter. And then defensively, it's been a familiar story since the All-Star break in particular, but really all year long, especially lately. The Hawks have been really good on offense and not very good on defense, and that was definitely the case here. Just as it's been in recent games as well, they got better in the second half. I will say that defensively. It got stiffer and stiffer from Atlanta's defense, but they still allowed about a 123-ish defensive rating in this game. That's not going to be good enough against an offense in Minnesota that's not necessarily lighting the world on fire. Now, they're obviously better with Karl-Anthony Towns available, but Anthony Edwards did not play in this game. So it wasn't like they had overwhelming talent available to Minnesota in this one. But the big thing, and this goes back into the turnover battle I talked about a second ago, was the possession battle went to Minnesota. And the Hawks kind of predicate themselves, again, generally speaking, on winning the possession battle. I always stress that. Rebounding, turnovers, just taking more shots than your opponent can be a lot of sort of give you a pretty big leg up when it comes to winning on the margins. And Minnesota took 7 more shots from the floor than the Hawks did and 4 more free throws than the Hawks did. That is the difference between a game in which the Hawks lose by 1 and a game in which the Hawks win by a couple of points, because the two teams had very similar shooting numbers in this game. Both teams were good from 2, good from 3, good from the line. 27 assists for Minnesota, 28 assists for Atlanta. It was just the turnovers and the rebounding both went in Minnesota's direction. That kind of led to the math problem swinging toward the Wolves. Again, all told, it's not a terrible loss. And I know for a fact, because I hear people in my mentions and all that fun stuff who don't like to hear that. And I totally understand. I'm going to use the in a vacuum statement for a second because, look, the Hawks were 3.5 underdogs in this game at FanDuel. They were down by significant stretches for most of the game. It was back-to-back with travel without DeJounte Murray. But I say all that to say, if you're up 11 with 8 to go and you have plenty of chances to win the game, it's familiar in a bad way for Hawks fans, I'm sure, to have this game fall out of their fingers. What Larry talk about how they competed after the game. I would agree with that. We'll get into kind of how the end of the game unfolded later on in the podcast. But the Hawks did not execute very well. They did compete. They did play hard, and that's worth something. But the Hawks I'm not saying they had to win this game. It's one of those games where like it is just maddening. And also, as we'll get into later on as well, the Bulls lost. And I believe, the Raptors lost as well. So this was a chance for the Hawks to kind of cement themselves as a top 8 team, probably in the standings in the playoffs. And they got this one sort of went away from them at the end of the game. So losing to Minnesota by 1 point on the road on a back-to-back is like, that's fine. It's not the end of the world. But given that it's March 22nd right now, and the Hawks were in a position where they were in control, at least on some level down the stretch, it is a pretty maddening result. And without Murray, without Jalen Johnson, et cetera, but still one the Hawks will be kicking themselves over, I am sure, as they go into 2 days off on Thursday and Friday. All right, we'll get into how this game kind of unfolded in a second with the way the sort of, from start to finish. And this one, then at the end of the podcast, as we always do for new listener, what we do at the end of the podcast is talk about the individual players who performed well, who struggled, et cetera, all that context and more coming up. But first, a word from our sponsors on the show today. I'm very excited about today's partner and sponsor on the show today, and that is the mobile game Ultimate Pro Basketball GM. If you've been dreaming about becoming an NBA GM and managing a basketball team, your dream can come true right now, and it's just definitely the thing for you. Manage every aspect of the team, play through the season, and even lead your team to glory with Ultimate Pro Basketball GM. You're responsible for hiring the right coaches and trading players and training players and making draft picks and generally navigating your franchise through stuff like free agency and all the fun challenges that come along with an NBA season. This all happens in a realistic game world, and Ultimate Pro Basketball GM is completely free, and it's playable offline as well. Play as you go, whenever you want to, as much as you want to, and we're already having fun behind the scenes with all kinds of trash talk between our Locked On NBA hosts. It's been a lot of fun to kind of dive into the game and all the process there. It's an awesome way as well to connect with friends who also happen to be diehard basketball fans. If you're listening to this podcast as well, you get a 100% free boost to the franchise when you use the promo code Locked On in the game store. To download the game, visit probasketballgm.com or scan the code to look it up in the App Store. That is probasketballgm.com. When you get there, use the promo code Locked On. Ultimate Basketball GM. Start your dynasty today. Okay, and early on in this game, offensively, it was firing all cylinders for both teams, really. Just as a spoiler alert here, it was 40-39 at the end of the first quarter in this one. The Hawks scored 15 points in the first 9 possessions. Trey had a good start in this one. He definitely cooled off from there. But Gobert was in this very deep drought from Minnesota, and Trey got comfortable with that in a hurry. Karl-Anthony Towns came back after 52 games out. 52 games is a long time. He played very well on offense in particular for Minnesota in this game. Rotationally, no huge surprises if you watch the game on Tuesday. And by the way, I did a podcast about that game as well, of the Hawks winning comfortably over the Pistons on Tuesday. But it was basically the exact same group of available players for the Hawks. 10 guys played, and same kind of feeling. Aaron Holiday was the first sub in for Trae Young as sort of the spot guy when Trae left the floor. Then AJ for Bogey, and then Garrison Matthews and Okongwu, etc. Also, of course, Saddiq Bey played the backup power forward spot with Jalen Johnson out. They used the offense-heavy group of Trae Young, Garrison Matthews, AJ Griffin, and Saddiq Bey a few times. That is pretty flammable defensively, but obviously is offensively charged in a lot of ways. But Minnesota was really hot from 3 early on. There were 6 of their first 7 from long range in this spot. The Hawks did have a 14-2 run mid-first quarter after they got down by 8 points. John Collins had 6 points in about 30 seconds on his own to start that run. The Hunter had a couple jump shots. AJ had a great finish in the lane, and that forced a timeout. But Minnesota went right back to scoring after that. So again, 40-39 after the first quarter. As I said before in the intro of the pod, defensively it got better throughout the game, but it was really bad early on. The Wolves had about a 155 offensive rating in the first quarter of this game. They hit 8 threes. That's probably not sustainable, obviously, in that point. But still, Trey was awesome, I thought, in the first quarter. He was not awesome with the game, but he was really good early on. And the Hawks shot 70% from the floor with 11 assists in the first quarter. Usually, it was kind of a weird substitution thing. I will say at the top of the second quarter, Trey started the second quarter for some reason, and he played 40 seconds That was a little bit odd. Usually he never starts that because Murray comes in then and does kind of the point guard stuff. But then they brought in Bogey and Aaron together. And I do think that tying Aaron Holiday to Bogey is a good idea. And Aaron was very good in this game. There was a rough sequence, though, moments after that when Okongwu got a foul offensively. Then Bogey had a pick 6 turnover and then another turnover after that. And he struggled defensively on Taurean Prince in the first half as well. Sort of in contrast to that, I thought Aaron was really good, but Trey was kind of bothered, it looked like, by either like his knee or his calf or something. He was kind of like moving gingerly for large portions. It never came out of the game, but definitely was not moving at his normal speed at times. It was tight until the middle of the second quarter, and then the Wolves had a 13-4 run, but the Hawks back down by 8 points, where they kind of hung in a few different times in this game. They were trailing. They got into the halftime break down by 5 after a late putback by John Collins, but the offense kind of had a slow period in that second quarter after the crazy start. Still good on offense for the whole half, but defensively, a 137 defensive rating in that first half, which again, it improved, but it was bad early on. After halftime, there was a pivotal challenge actually early in the third quarter where it would have been McDaniel's 4th foul for Minnesota. It became, after the Wolves challenged and won, Collins' 3rd foul plus free throws. And then Collins got a 4th foul after that. So that was kind of a big swing in a lot of ways. They were down by, I think, 9 in the first 3 minutes or so. That was their largest deficit of the entire game. But then the Hawks started kind of climbing back into the game. An 8-0 run with a 3 by Bogey. Capella got to the rim and finished through contact for a 3-point play. And the Hawks did take the lead mid-third quarter behind Sadiq Bey, who hit 3 threes in a pretty short period of time. Hunter had a huge dunk kind of out of nowhere in a way that he's not like – he kind of wound up for that one in a way that he rarely does. That was fun to see. And then Okongwu was awesome in the third and fourth quarters. He had a great possession on Towns where he kind of bodied him up and had a block. There was lots of foul trouble there for the Hawks. 4 fouls each on Hunter, Collins, and Okongwu by the end of the third quarter. It was very whistle-happy, I thought, at the end of the third, in frustrating fashion, just from a game watching perspective, not even from the Hawks perspective, just like a basketball appreciator perspective. It was pretty rough to watch the end of the third quarter. The Hawks did make 5 threes in the third and go up by 3 points. They ran this full 5-man bench unit in the fourth quarter for like 3.5 minutes with literally the entire 5-man unit on the bench. Now, obviously, people pointed this out. That bench unit, they do have a Okongwu who's basically a starter, and I do understand that. I'm not saying otherwise. It's just reality. He is the backup on this team. And yes, I've said numerous times, even this week on the podcast, that he's like a top 25, 30 center in the league, but he's still a bench guy on this team. So they played a full bench unit in a fourth quarter of a tight game. I don't usually love that, but it's kind of maybe necessitated by the absence of Murray and Johnson. Then they had a big run, actually, with about it was a 10-0 run to go up by the aforementioned 11 points with 8 minutes to go. Okongwu was awesome in that stretch, had a block, 3-point play. After a timeout, Bey hit a step back 3. It was a pretty crazy, like kind of a bad shot, but he made it. But then there was the almost immediate response by Minnesota, another 10-0 run to tie the game with 6 minutes to go. Trey had a pretty rough pick 6 turnover, and then Hunter took a pretty bad mid-ranger that he probably didn't need to take. Trey had another turnover a couple minutes later, then that actually leading to a dunk by Gobert. Snyder was pretty frustrated and called timeout. And I will say, Trey tried to draw a charge, and certainly was a charge, I think. No call there, and Quinn was not happy about that. But that led to a 16-2 extended run by the Minnesota Timberwolves to go up by 4 points with 4.5 minutes to go. So the Hawks went from up 11 to down 4 in about, 3.5 minutes. So the lead was kind of gone at that point. Out of a timeout, Trey to draw a foul. That was good to see. Got to the line for 3 free throws, made all 3. We'll kind of fast forward a little bit here. Trey had a nice play on Taurean Prince defensively. We kind of stripped him in the lane, and that got the Hawks back within 1. Like a couple of big stops when Bogey and Capella kind of collapsed on Kyle Anderson at the rim for a stop. That led to a run-out layup by Collins after a pass by Trey to take the lead with 1:18 to go. That was a 6-0 mini run by Atlanta. But then out of a timeout, Mike Conley hit a jump shot. That was immediately actually checked to see if it was a 2 or 3. It ended up being a 2, which was helpful for the Hawks. But then Trey drew a foul, made both. So back and forth. Towns finally misses a shot. That was very helpful. But with 30 seconds to go, the Hawks get the rebound up 1, and Minnesota didn't foul, which some teams might have. It was fine to not foul there, I don't think, from Minnesota's perspective. But the Hawks generated a great shot. So it was a drive and kick from Trey to Bogey late in the shot clock. They wasted a bunch of time. And if Bogey makes that shot, they win the game. Not for sure, but almost certainly, 95%, maybe even higher than that. He just missed it. And that happens sometimes. It would have been a huge kind of dagger shot, but it just didn't fall. And that led to Minnesota taking a timeout with 7 seconds to go. And the controversial play of the night. So it was Karl-Anthony Towns and an ISO against John Collins, and they called a foul on Collins when he and Towns got tangled up. It looked like, to everyone, I think, that Towns initiated the contact. And the Hawks had 2 timeouts left, so they basically kind of had to challenge, and that was definitely a challengeable play by Snyder. It was unsuccessful. That was pretty brutal, honestly. Now, by the letter of the law in the challenge system, I get why they didn't overturn it. It wasn't like one of those like absolutely clear overturn things because it was called a foul on the floor. If it wasn't called a foul on the floor, it would have been a foul on Towns. But it's one of those things where the Hawks got a bad whistle there at a bad time. It was in Minnesota. Collins didn't like play it perfectly, but didn't do anything really wrong on that play. It was definitely a hook by Towns, it looked like on the replay. So that's just a bad beat for Atlanta in a lot of different ways. The officiating in this game was not good. Ben Taylor is an official that a lot of people do not like, including me. I don't think he's very good. I know my friend Glenn Willis is not a big fan of Ben Taylor. Fred VanVleet famously got into it with him on a press conference the other day. So he's not popular in the league, and he was the crew chief tonight. It was pretty rough. Anyway, Towns makes both. That was a bad beat for the Hawks, but there still was time. 3.6 seconds to go for Atlanta. They go with Bay in place of Capella, which makes sense. Down one. I don't necessarily hate leaving a center in there because they're only down by one. But Bay's obviously a better offensive player in a lot of ways, so I get that. They didn't get a good look. I'm sure everybody's seen the replay of this listening to this podcast. Hunter ends up inbounding to Collins. It goes back to Hunter for a shot that was like makeable, but not a good shot, obviously. If you watch the play back, Snyder even said this after the game. There was no like follow-up on what kind of actions they were, but he said there were three options on the play. One of them looked like was bogey on a flare to the back corner. It would have been a very, very, very tough pass. He might have been open for a split second, but we'll come back to this in a second. It would have been a tough pass. Then they had Sadiq Bey kind of doing like a very similar thing to what they did with AJ Griffin on game winner early this year, kind of in a mid-post situation. But Kyle Anderson smartly got off the inbounder and was like basically in the way of that pass, making it very tough to execute that. And then Trey was working against McDaniels, and McDaniels was at one point kind of face guarding him, and they probably could have got it to Trey if you forced it to him. But that wasn't like a situation where they were obviously trying to force it to Trey. He was probably one of the options, but it wasn't like he was quote unquote open either. And I'll say this now. I do not like having Hunter as the inbounder there. He's not a good passer, and I don't mean that in a mean way. It's just that Hunter's skill set does not include high end passing or feel. I don't love having Trey pass it in either, which I think Nate used to do at times, and Trey's probably too small for that role. But I would not have had Hunter pass the ball. And I think that almost anyone would have been better than Hunter as the guy passing the ball in. So that's tough. And look, the Hawks also, I think the Hawks also wanted a foul on Prince under the basket on the rebound. Probably was letter to the law a foul. That's also not a call you're going to get really ever at the buzzer. So that one didn't bother me too much. But in the end, they had chances. They didn't execute the play. Snyder said they just didn't execute the play very well, and I agree with him. There's a lot to get to there, but it's just one of those things where it could have been better. It could have been better all the way through. The Hawks had chances to win this game at the end. They could have closed with with Congo instead of Capella, who had been playing very well. That didn't bother me as much as the Hawks fans. I got a lot of responses from Hawks fans to that. That was why they lost. I wouldn't go that far, but I thought Congo was better than Capella in the game, so certainly that would not have bothered me. And in general, people were asking questions about why the Hawks did not go with more of the bench unit. The way it is in the NBA basically is that if you have starting lineups that are starting lineups, then that's kind of who closes the game in a lot of ways. Now, the Hawks starters have been good this year. That's kind of not up for debate. Obviously, no Murray in this game. But at the end of the game recently, they have not been playing all that well as a unit. And there are some limitations offensively, in particular, with that Hunter, Collins, Capella front court. Capella is not playing his absolute best basketball. I think he's still playing just fine and pretty good. But Congo is obviously shining, which is good. That's obviously a nice problem to have those two guys together. But no matter what, there's little things you can nitpick along the way. But Atlanta had chances. They blew the lead initially in a hurry to go, again, up 11 to down 4 in like 3 minutes. And then they had chances after that. The bogey shot, I don't want to make too much of that, but a wide open three from Bogdanović is like a 50% shot, and it just didn't go in. If that goes in, you win the game. So anyway, I'll stop ranting and raving about this game. And in general, it's obviously a frustrating loss for the Hawks, and we'll get into how this game kind of unfolded from the player perspective in a second with 10 guys who appeared in this one. But that's all I got for now. A game that was frustrating and will certainly leave a mark heading into the rest of the week. Okay, player stuff on the way, but first, a word from our sponsors on today's podcast. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. It's the best time of the year right now in college basketball. Plus, the stretch run in the NBA is also happening. It's the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're a new customer, get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 with FanDuel. That means bonus bets coming back to you if your first bet does not win at FanDuel. Download the app right now. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Bet on anything you're looking for in the sports world, including point spreads and totals and money lines and player props. The Hawks are back in action over the weekend with a home back-to-back on Saturday and Sunday, and there'll be plenty of odds and lines to look at in FanDuel's app in the next couple of days. And from there, find many more exclusive bets at FanDuel. Plus, FanDuel also lets you combine bets together for a bigger payout with the same game parlay. Don't miss the chance to get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, and we'll start with the bench in this game. And generally speaking, the bench was pretty good. Now, Garrison Matthews was the one guy who did not have a great game. 3 points in 12 minutes, made 1 3, 2 rebounds. He was fine, just didn't make a huge impact. He's obviously was the 10th guy for a reason. That's kind of the role he should be in, even with 2 injuries. That's probably the way he should be deployed at this point. AJ was kind of quiet. I thought he was fine, generally speaking. But had 4 points, 2 assists, 2 rebounds, and a block. Had one nice circus layup around the rim, but was otherwise fairly quiet. I thought Aaron Holiday was very good in this game. 4 points, yes, but 7 assists and 4 steals for Aaron in 16 minutes. 16 minutes, 7 assists, 4 steals. Obviously, that's just one part of the stat thing, but he's their best on-ball defender. He was plus 12 in the game. Snyder said he was terrific. That was the quote after the game, and I agree with him. I think Aaron was a huge part of why the Hawks were in the game and winning the game at different times. And we'll get back to it in a second, but this is one of the rare times when the Hawks were in a close game and they got killed in Trey minutes, and they won by a lot the non-Trey minutes in this game. And that was a lot of that was tied to Aaron. And then Okongwu and Bey were the 2 leaders off the bench. Bey had a great second half. I think he had all 16 of his points in the second half. Actually, he had 4 threes, 6 rebounds, 2 assists. I thought he struggled pretty badly in the first half, actually. He was probably one of the worst guys in the first half, but he was really good, really dialed in, took one heat check shot that he made at the end of the fourth quarter. But that's part of the deal with Saddiq Bey. He had 3 turnovers, not always pretty, but the shot making is very, very impressive when he has it going for 3-point range, and that's very valuable. And then Okongwu, 14 points, 7 rebounds, 3 blocks in 19 minutes. Now, he did have 5 fouls because Okongwu can't help himself but getting fouls. So that's part of why he didn't play more in this game, but I thought he was really good when he played. I've seen a lot of this now, and I get it's always been this way. It's very natural, but it's like Okongwu versus Capella, and that's not the way you have to think about it. I understand why people do it, but Okongwu's been playing great recently. I've said that at every turn. This has been the best stretch of his career the last couple of weeks and months, and that makes sense. He's getting older and getting better, and that's what you want to see. But speaking of just how he played, he was really good. I thought he changed the game in the third quarter. He was excellent, and not too many notes beyond that other than just to try to stop fouling at some point. To the starters. Capella, we'll go there now. 11 points, 8 rebounds, 3 assists. I thought he was fine. He didn't play great, but I also understand why, especially against Gobert, you might want to go with more size, and I get that too. So, Gobert and Towns playing together. The Hawks probably could have been a little bit more creative in crunch time, especially using Okongwu's length defensively, etc. But I thought Capella individually just didn't play badly. People are getting mad at him sometimes for the way that they're using him in drop coverage, but that's a scheme thing. It's not like he's choosing not to go out to sort of extend defensively at times against guards. That's kind of what the Hawks are doing schematically. So it's kind of the same Rudy Gobert problem that they've always had there. But anyway, Capella was fine. He didn't play great. He didn't play bad. He was fine. Bogey, 11 points on 11 shots, 1 of 6 from 3. I'm sure he'll be kicking himself about that missed 3 at the end of the game. Did have 2 blocks in this game, weirdly, and a steal. I thought he played okay on offense. On defense, he was really bad, especially in the first half. Taurean Prince ate him up, which is not what you want to see, obviously. Bogey's defense continues to be a problem, but that's nothing new there. Hunter had 16 points on 12 shots. Offensively was fine. Had the big dunk. Defensively, kind of not his best, I didn't think, in this one. Collins had 16 points and 5 rebounds on 9 shots. He's been so efficient recently. I think getting him the ball more would be a good idea. But beyond that, I thought he was fine. Obviously, the late foul on Towns, not really his fault. If you watch that playback, I don't think anybody thought he actually fouled him. So that's not like a glaring black mark against him. I thought he played okay in this game, pretty solid. And then Trey. So he had a weird one. I thought Trey was super awesome in the first quarter of this game, totally control, dominating offensively. But then from there, he was really not very good. He had 5 turnovers in the last 3 quarters. 3-11 from 3-11 from the floor in the last 3 quarters. Got to the line 16 times. That's obviously very valuable, and that's part of the deal. Trey took, 2/3 of the Hawks free throws in this game, which is great. 8 assists, nice. But 6 turnovers, a couple of bad ones in crunch time. Not efficient from 2-point range at all in this game. He was 3 of 12 on 2s. That's kind of weird for him. Floaters, he was missing those in this one. I don't think he played that bad, but he's got to be better in the second half for sure. And look, the fourth quarter struggles. It's not all on Trey ever, but when he's not good, the Hawks do struggle, and that's kind of almost universally the case. And that was not a coincidence here. I think plus minus probably overstated a little bit, but I thought that he was not his best in this game, despite 29 points and 8 assists, which again is a testament to him that he can have that kind of game and those kind of numbers with not playing that well, but I don't think he played that well in this game. Okay, before we get out of here, a big blown opportunity for the Hawks in the standings. Beyond the loss itself, which obviously is reflective and was a big opportunity missed, the Raptors and Bulls both lost, which means the Hawks could have gamed a game on those teams. They're only one ahead of Toronto now and only 1.5 game ahead of Chicago now. Pacers won tonight, so they're actually only 3 ahead of the Pacers in this game. In the standings. And then Miami's 3.5 ahead because they actually won tonight. So the 7 seed is looking like a pipe dream at this point, although Brooklyn keeps losing. Brooklyn is now tied with Miami, which is interesting. But still, that's the 3.5 games away, and the Hawks only have 9 games remaining. So they're going to have to probably go, 7-2, 8-1 to kind of get there in the mix there. I think you're looking more at trying to avoid falling into the 9-10, and a win would have been big, but they did not get one in this game. Now, 2 days off before a home back-to-back, actually, against Indiana and Memphis on Saturday and Sunday. I don't think I'll have a show between now and then because of NCAA tournament work that I have to do and all that fun stuff, but I'll have a pair of shows about those games over the weekend. And a home back-to-back is interesting. And clearly that Indiana game, you don't want to make too much of it, but you're playing against a team in Indiana they're not terrible as long as they have Tyrese Haliburton playing. They usually perform fairly well. But when they don't, they're terrible. And in general, Indiana is a team that you need to beat at home. Kind of like not quite as bad as the Detroit game on Tuesday, but that'll be a game where the Hawks are favored. And with Memphis coming out on Sunday, it's kind of the same situation where the Hawks will be pretty much favored in one and not favored in the other, and you try to get both, and maybe you have to settle for one. But we'll get into all that stuff later on in the week. Thank you for listening to the podcast, everybody. I do appreciate it. Obviously, a frustrating night for Hawks fans. I got a lot of angry people after the game, and I totally understand it. It's one of those losses that will stick with you, but hopefully they right the ship on Saturday, and we'll get into all of that next time. Please subscribe to the show across podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, also Google Play, and then we're also on the video side on YouTube. Please tell a friend about the podcast. Ratings, reviews, shares, likes, all that fun stuff. Follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Hawks. Follow me on Twitter at BT Rowland. Follow my Patreon work on the written side at patreon.com/BT Rowland. Thank you once again for listening to the podcast. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you after the game on Saturday.